Hello and welcome to Newsmakers on CHCH Podcast. I'm Louie Butko, and on today's show, I'm very pleased to be joined by Mike Collins-Williams. He is the CEO of the West End Home Builders Association, which advocates for land development, home building, and renovation industries, as well as new home buyers. Mike, thank you so much for making the time today.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, what is the West End Home Builders Association?
So we have 320 member companies made up of all disciplines within the residential construction and land development industry here in Hamilton, stretching across through Burlington and Grimsby. And that encompasses everything from sort of the skyscrapers you see going up downtown, small scale, I call it missing middle housing, sort of that gentle intensification, or some of the more traditional greenfield subdivisions that you see going in. As well as the companies that also make up the construction industry, whether it's skilled trades, planning firms, engineering firms. It's a huge industry with a diversity of jobs, and we're also directly connected with a provincial Ontario Home Builders Association and a national Canadian Home Builders.
So basically, this provides individual construction companies, individual trades, bigger development companies, a united voice. Is that sort of what you try to do? You go forward, you advocate for them with one solid united voice?
Yeah, that's the whole idea, to speak with one voice for an industry. So it's a hyper-competitive industry, but there are certainly different issues that impact the industry as a whole. So whether it's taxation, government regulations, insurance issues, or tariffs, certainly a topical subject for today, but there are obviously issues that impact each and every company. And it's a way that we can speak with one voice to government and to the public.
You said more than 300?
320 member companies employing about 20,000 people in Hamilton.
Okay, so to get 320 companies to agree on certain things, that I have to think that sometimes is a challenge. You mentioned it. It's a competitive business. You're trying to find ways to save money, ways to do. How difficult is that sometimes when you have to represent 320 different competing voices but come out as one?
Yeah, it can be a challenge. We do have a governance structure, board of directors, different committees and whatnot, and it is a competitive industry. And there's different types of building, right? There's high-rise, mid-rise, missing middle, low-rise types of housing. So each of the different market segments also has different needs, and sometimes government policy can sort of pit different sides against each other in some ways. But we try the best we can to speak with one voice and to advocate on behalf of our members and ultimately new home buyers, the consumers that are either buying homes, renting in homes, and making up our community.
And you advocate at every level then, federal, provincial, municipal?
The West End Home Builders Association, we're focused mostly on Hamilton, Burlington, and Grimsby, but I was down at Queen's Park yesterday, and I do spend some time in Ottawa at Parliament Hill. So all three levels of government have a significant impact on the industry, and taxes make up 30% of the cost of a new home, and that comes from all three different levels of government.
Well, let's get into that, and let's start here locally, which is what you're focused on. We hear a lot about development charges. How big of an impact are rising development charges when it comes to the cost of building homes? We see it all the time. You want to build, development charges, new build. What kind of impact is that having on the industry?
The impact is huge, and frankly, some of the challenges that the industry is having today is that the cost of actually building and delivering a new home, whether that's a new home or a condominium, exceeds the ability of the market to pay. And a huge component of that escalating cost that we've seen over the past decade is taxes. So development charges specifically, 15, 20 years ago, they existed, but they were a much smaller component of what that ultimate price was. Across the GTA and Hamilton, development charges are up 327% since 2009. The City of Toronto is up over 1,000%. So different municipalities have increased them at different levels. And here locally in Hamilton, if you just take the last few years, they're up 87% since 2021. So when you think about that cost of a new home, a huge component is escalating development charges that frankly have gotten out of control and have become untethered from economic reality.
Okay, but the city says we need these development charges to put in new roads. We need these development charges to put in new sewers, parks, schools that might have to be built in the area. How else would those things be paid for? How else should they be paid for?
So there's a variety of things that development charges pay for. Something that I don't think the general public or consumers quite understand clearly is that anything internal to a development, the roads, the sewers, et cetera, that you see within a development, that has nothing to do with development charges. Builders and developers actually build that at their own cost, and of course that's incorporated in the cost of a home, and those features are turned over to the municipality once the development is complete. Development charges primarily pay for downstream costs, and there is supposed to be a direct nexus between the idea of growth paying for growth and that it being directly tied to the building or the development. Over the years, as we've seen development charges escalate, that nexus has become looser and looser over time. We do have a Development Charges Act, a piece of legislation, but again, it's become somewhat untethered from reality. So we do need growth-related infrastructure, but the entirety of it is being piled onto the backs of new home buyers who pay for it upfront, infrastructure that's built to last 50 or 70 years, and they're paying for it entirely upfront and putting it into their mortgages.
So are politicians being misleading, or people being misleading when they're saying that these development charges, as you're saying, are paying for roads and parks? That's not entirely true.
There is parkland dedication that pays for parks, so that's separate from development charges. Development charges do pay for some roads and sewers, but those are downstream from the actual development. I think the challenge is that, and I'm empathetic to politicians at the City of Hamilton and other jurisdictions, in that, you know, somebody's got to pay for the roads, for the sewers, et cetera. And the majority of that should be paid for by those that are using it. I think there's a healthy debate as to where do you draw that line between what is a benefit to the existing community versus what is entirely new. And I think another huge component of the conversation is the provincial and the federal governments. Once upon a time, they used to have a larger role in paying for, you know, the big pieces of infrastructure like waste treatment plants, the big trunk sewers, transit, et cetera. And over time, the provincial and federal governments downloaded a lot of those costs in the 1990s onto municipalities. And over the last number of years, we've seen municipalities download those costs on the back of new home buyers, and that is a major reason why the cost of housing has gotten out of control.
Another issue in Hamilton is the timeline to get something approved. There is a long approval process when it comes to the City of Hamilton specifically. How has that affected your members' ability to start and complete new projects?
So my background, I'm an urban planner, and sometimes planning in ways has become a means to itself rather than a means to an end. Planning is a critical component of the land development process, and we do need to have checks and balances and approvals as you go step by step. The challenge is that it's gotten, again, somewhat out of control in terms of the length of the timelines. And, you know, you think about, you know, on your own personal finances, if you have a mortgage, you're paying interest charges on that home over time. If you have a $100 million skyscraper or, you know, significant subdivision that's going in, every day of delay, not year, not month, but every day of delay could be costing tens of thousands of dollars in terms of interest and carrying charges. So we need to ensure that we have a system that works, a system that protects the public interest, but is not mirrored in bureaucratic red tape. The Canadian Home Builders Association just did a national benchmarking study from Halifax to Victoria using a consistent methodology of the 23 largest cities in the country. And unfortunately, Hamilton ranks dead last in the entire country in terms of how long it takes to get a project approved. And the other unfortunate part of that study is they've done it 3 times, and each time they've done the study, Hamilton has fallen further down the rankings. So. Other municipalities are able to do things in half the amount of time, sometimes a third of the amount of time that Hamilton is able to do it. And, you know, there's a reason why young people are flocking to Alberta, and people are not moving to Edmonton for minus 40-degree weather. They're moving to Edmonton because they're able to build housing faster than we are, get through the approvals process faster, and development charges are a fraction of the cost, and they don't have the PST component of HST out there. So. The taxes on new homes in Alberta, specifically Calgary and Edmonton, are a fraction of what they are here, and that's that's contributing to a lot of the displacement and strange demographic patterns we're seeing with young people leaving Ontario.
So you mentioned the timeline of the approval process. So a developer buys this piece of land. They have a plan to build something. It's what the land is designed for. They announce it. You know, they want to get the cameras there. They want to get people excited. From that point to actually getting somebody their keys, what is that? That's what you're talking about when you're saying it's the longest process in Canada for Hamilton.
Yeah, and you know what? It depends on the project. I do know of some projects that you measure in decades rather than years. You know, a high-rise project could take a few years to get through the process, and there's multiple stages. It could be an official plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment, site plan. I don't want to get too technical, but there are multiple gates that one has to pass through, and planning's inherently political. Some projects can sail through more quickly if there's local political support, and other projects, you know, for better or for worse, NIMBYism is an issue where folks in the neighborhood don't necessarily want to see change. And again, I'm empathetic to that. People move to a neighborhood, they like it the way it is. They don't necessarily want new neighbors within that neighborhood. But we are the fastest growing region in North America, here in the greater Golden Horseshoe. And, you know, we need to basically double our existing housing production. And then on the low-rise side, you know, it can take years and years to get through the process. So there are different gates, there are different processes, and each of those processes have their own timelines.
So it seems like the particular housing, just based on what, taking away from what you just said there, you know, when you're measuring things in decades or years, oftentimes the most affordable housing is these condos, these high-rise developments, even low-rise developments. And you mentioned NIMBYism too there. That is not a municipal issue. That's a citizen issue, a community issue, a neighborhood issue. Would it be fair to say then that this is affecting lower income housing because you can't do these larger projects that would fit 20 residences in a place that previously had one?
It affects all types of housing. It's particularly acute when it comes to intensification. And, you know, there's no such thing. You have the idea of the starter home, that sort of white picket fence, small post-wartime bungalow in the 1950s and 60s. That doesn't really exist anymore. The starter home today is a one-bedroom or studio condo. It's where young people are breaking into the market with that most affordable element in terms of, you know, what's the dollar price, what's the carrying cost with a mortgage. And that type of housing is typically the most difficult to get through the land use planning approvals process. And NIMBYism is a challenge, and then that places political pressure on those local politicians. It's often easier to say no than yes, because those local politicians have to go back to the electorate every 4 years to seek re-election. And, you know, the planning is politics. Housing is politics. And part of the reason that we find ourselves in the housing crisis that we're in is our population is growing at breakneck speed, and it is a challenge to navigate and get through a very political process to actually build new homes.
To that point, a few years ago, Premier Doug Ford made a bold promise to build 1.5 million homes. It was part of a push to really kickstart the home construction, you know, get it into high gear. Then it went away. Then we just stopped hearing that number, 1.5 million homes. It hasn't been heard from since the premier. What happened to that? I mean, you mentioned obviously play a more local role, but what of the struggles that have happened? It's easy to blame COVID. It's easy to blame other things that we're going to discuss. But what happened to that goal of 1.5 million homes?
So the irony is 1.5 million is not actually enough. The promise was made about 5 years ago before the federal government spiked the immigration numbers, and those have come down a little bit in the last year. But Canada's population grew by 1.27 million people between January 1st, 2023 and January 1st, 2024. So we're at about 41 million people across the country right now. That's a 3.2% population increase, fastest pace of growth since 1957. And most of the people coming to Canada land either in the Vancouver Lower Mainland or the greater Golden Horseshoe, so Hamilton and the Toronto area. So that promise for the 1.5 million homes actually existed before the spike in population. We probably need closer to 1.7, 1.8 million now just to keep up with growth. And I'll be blunt, it's not going to happen. We need to double the pace of housing construction, and housing starts are falling off a cliff. We are in the worst market conditions we've been since the 1990s. The industry is bracing for major job losses. And the irony is, in the very moment that we need double production, production's being cut in half because of the cost to build, because of the planning approvals timelines, and because of the taxes. Of that 1.5 million, Hamilton committed to building 47,000 units as their fair share over 10 years, and the city of Hamilton is realistically no hope of meeting that number.
We'll get back to the city of Hamilton in just a second, but what would you say to criticisms that developers are more concerned about building big homes, building, neighborhoods with multiple homes, and not as focused on higher density? How would you, the criticism that if you have the money, you can build a new home. If you have the money, you can work your way through the system. Because a lot of people don't have that money to pay those taxes, to pay that increased cost that's passed down to homeowners.
So I'm challenged by that criticism because in 2024, across Canada and on Ontario, we built the fewest number of single detached homes since 1955. The CMHC housing starts numbers, that's 69 years. So there seems to be this perception that most of the construction, or a large component of the construction, single detached housing, but that does not play out in the data. There has been a huge shift over the last 2 decades to much higher density forms of housing, which frankly are more affordable to the end user, makes use of our existing infrastructure. And you know what? A lot of people do want to have that single detached home or townhome, that piece of grass, a barbecue out back, a place for their kids to play. But that sort of so-called dream of home ownership and that concept is sort of fading away because of the sheer cost of delivering those types of homes. And, the development industry has pivoted. At the end of the day, we need to build what consumers can afford and what people want. That's capitalism for you. If somebody is building a product that nobody can afford to buy and nobody wants, well, they're going to go out of business pretty quickly.
Let's get back to the city of Hamilton. What makes Hamilton, we talked about the timeline, we talked about the development charges, obviously not as bad as in Toronto, but what particular issues do you find with Hamilton that's really causing these struggles to get new projects underway?
There seems to be an anti-housing sentiment politically in Hamilton, and I often compare Hamilton to Burlington. I mean, it's 2 cities side by side, right across the bay from each other. The city of Burlington is very focused on upzoning around the GO stations. The city of Burlington actually reduced development charges last year. In contrast, Hamilton increased them by 36%. And the city of Burlington just yesterday passed a motion at council to defer development charges from the permit stage to occupancy stage. Sort of a technical thing, but that is a significant cost savings on financing, which is something we need in this sort of tariff moment. You contrast that with Hamilton, and Hamilton wanted to prevent an urban boundary expansion. Fine. They said that they wanted to support intensification, yet when it comes down to, when it's spoken about in abstract intensification, the city seems to be very pro-intensification. But when it comes down to actual political votes on actual projects, most of the high-density projects are having to be appealed to the Ontario Lands Tribunal to actually get through the process, which can add another year of timelines and significant legal costs, as well as just what I previously mentioned on the increasing development charges. So it is very difficult to navigate the process and to get anything built in Hamilton.
Well, I mean, Simone Gavros this morning was talking about Kenilworth and Barton, and this is a city-owned land that they want to either lease to a developer or sell. I think they were looking for a nonprofit, but you have those NIMBY people who are coming back and saying, nope, where am I going to park my car? That's kind of 2 sides of the coin, like you mentioned, because you do have to get elected in 4 years. You do have to speak for your constituents. Usually the angriest are the loudest. Is there a way to fight back against not in my backyard?
There is always going to be a degree of not in my backyard sentimentism, but I want to emphasize that the local interest is not the same as the public interest. We are in a housing crisis. We desperately need to increase the amount of homes built so that young people have a future here in Hamilton and don't have to leave. And that's increasingly what we're seeing. We're seeing young families with kids choosing to leave the city of Hamilton. We're also now in a tariff war with the United States, and there are going to be job losses in some sectors in Hamilton. We should be focused on trying to get more housing built because there are 20,000 people employed in the construction sector building new homes and condos in Hamilton, and housing starts have fallen off a cliff. I am very concerned that we're going to see huge job losses in the construction sector in 2025. We need stronger political leadership in Hamilton to get more housing built and to keep jobs in Hamilton.
You're not the only one saying this. Peter Terkstra, the president of Terkstra Lumber, coincidentally, I guess, he told all local councils, he sent a video basically to all the local councilors in which his businesses are represented. That's from Niagara all the way to here in Hamilton. They are getting in the way of builders, and even before the tariff war, he said this year he's estimating the construction of new homes could be down by as much as 50%, and that local builders are in a depression, so he expects, quote, slew of bankruptcies. Is it really that bad?
I cannot emphasize enough how bad it is. Housing starts for January, and look, this is only 1 month of the year. There were 30 housing starts across Grimsby, Hamilton, and Burlington. A huge region, only 30 housing starts. Last year, there were over 200. That's the lowest number in 10 years, not by a little bit, but by a long shot. Housing starts plummeted in 2024. We're looking at worse in 2025. And housing starts are a lagging indicator. You don't start a home until you've sold a home. So if we rewind back a little bit and look at new home sales, on the condo side, high rise, we had the worst year since 1996. So there's a 5-alarm fire going on right now in terms of the lack of sales, which will lead to a lack of construction. And look, you see some cranes in the skyline. As those projects finish up, those construction crews are not being redeployed to new contracts. Those construction crews are going to be looking for work.
So you mentioned the number, 20,000 construction jobs here in Hamilton, excuse me. You mentioned 5-alarm fire. What can we do? What can be done? What we're here talking on this show. What do you hope people take away from this?
So the West End Home Builders Association has recommended that the mayor strike a housing and development task force with industry leaders to work directly with leadership at the city of Hamilton. Something similar was struck recently in Mississauga and recently in Burlington, and we've seen major public policy changes in Burlington and in Mississauga that actually recognize the severity of the crisis. We need to look at our planning approvals process from top to bottom. The status quo is no longer an option given the crisis that we're in, and we need to look at the taxation. The 30% of taxes, the 30% of the cost of a new home is straight up taxes. We need to look at the taxation, what we can do at the local level, and that doesn't let the province and the feds off the hook. Senior levels of government also have work to do, but we can only control what we can control locally, and there is a responsibility for the city of Hamilton to take action. And
because we hear it all the time, it is the number one issue. It's the number one issue. Affordability, housing. Affordability, housing. Affordable housing, right? 1, 2, 3, basically, whatever order you want to put them in. It just seems to be that, like, why do you not see politicians doing more? I mean, that's kind of what you're asking too. Like, you should be doing more, but what do you think is the pushback from? Is it what I said earlier, that the loudest voices are the angriest, that happen to be like, I don't want this in my neighborhood? Like, what do you find is the biggest challenge of actually reaching the councillors or the city and them agreeing to do something?
Well, we're in a crisis today, and action needs to be taken. But I think we got too comfortable, perhaps, over the last decade leading up to the pandemic, that we had a very strong housing market. There was a lot of construction, resales were high, and the prices kept escalating, which was bad for consumers. But as the prices kept escalating, local politicians were able to keep adding new taxes, increasing development charges. And at the time, you know what? The industry complained, but frankly, the market could bear it. The market can no longer bear it. The market is broken, and we need governments to work with industry to address some of the problems that arose over the last decade in that bull run.
We've barely mentioned the T word that has dominated the headlines in the last month and a half, 2 months, and that being tariffs. When you're talking about a crisis of development charges and timelines and things of that nature of getting new starts, just how badly are the tariff threats compounding this 5-alarm fire that you say is happening?
So the market had already fallen off a cliff before this came into the equation, and I sort of break the tariffs into sort of 3 big buckets. The first bucket is the impact on the American housing industry. Canadian lumber, in particular from Ontario and Quebec, make up a major component of the supply chain in the United States. The direct impact of the tariffs is actually worse for our American neighbors in terms of how that's going to impact housing prices. The National Association of Home Builders in the United States in Washington is lobbying very hard with the government down there. So I wish them all of the best. And we certainly need our American counterparts to be raising this issue with the Trump administration of just how bad this is going to be. And hopefully that will help ease pressure down there. The second bucket is the impact on Canadian builders. In Canada in 2023, we imported just over $20 billion worth of products that go into new homes. So while a lot of the products are local here in Canada, we use local lumber, local labor, local aggregates, whether that's bricks or concrete. We are importing, components of insulation. We're importing windows. We're importing a lot of appliances. So if Canada adds a 25% countervailing tariff on all U.S. goods, the tariffs paid on those goods are going to increase the cost of importing these items. And look, I love the Buy Canadian. I'm doing Buy Canadian, but in many cases, buying Canadian isn't a way to avoid those tariffs for some of those specialized components or some of those supply chains. So ultimately, some critical products like drywall, we're going to be hit with it, and it is going to raise prices over time. Some supply chains can switch, and hopefully we'll be able to work our way through it. And the third bucket's the most critical one. That's consumer confidence. Consumer confidence has been absolutely shot. And even if the tariffs don't come in at the beginning of April, I think there's going to be a long hangover here. Look, if anybody's worried about their job, concerned about job security, they're not buying a new home. They're not buying a new condo. They're not renovating their home. So that is going to have a huge impact on construction jobs here in Hamilton as well.
What give me a reason to be optimistic? Is there a reason to be optimistic about it seems like houses are getting more expensive. This tariff war is not going to help. I want to own a undetached dwelling with a yard and a couple of bedrooms and bathrooms. Why should I be optimistic that's an attainable goal in the future?
I'll give you 2 reasons.
Okay.
One, we should never let a good crisis go to waste. So let's take the opportunity right now to make long-term changes to the structure of how we build and approve housing, not just in Hamilton, but right across Ontario, right across Canada. There are systematic issues that need to be addressed, and I do think that this is the moment that all 3 levels of government and industry can be working together to make permanent changes to our housing system. And I think the second reason to be optimistic is the economic and demographic underpinnings are there. We've attracted the best and the brightest from around the world for the last number of years. People still want to live in Canada. People still love Canada. And I think that this should and will continue to be a destination of choice for the best and the brightest around the world and for capital in terms of investment. And at some point, this market is going to turn. And when it turns, you watch out. There's going to be a lot of new jobs, a lot of employment, and a lot more housing going up.
Well, I did want to end on an optimistic note there because we did use the word crisis quite a bit there, but it's true. It is a crisis, and I appreciate your insights and everything that's going on. Mike, really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Mike Collins-Williams. He is the CEO of the West End Home Builders Association. My thanks to him for joining me today. My thanks to you as well for joining me. Thanks to Laura Brody for directing today's episode. And hey, while you're here, make sure you like and subscribe to CHCH Podcast so you never miss an episode of this show or any of the other great shows we have for you, including Sportsline with Bubba O'Neill, where you can find that wherever you found this one, or you can go to chch.com/podcast. From all of us here at CHCH, I'm Louie Butko. Have a great day.